Hello and welcome to this new blog post. Today we're going to talk about one of the most important ingredients guaranteeing success of a data warehousing project, namely being able to define what success looks like so that you have a much better chance of being successful. If you don't define what success looks like, it's going to be tough, right? Now, if you ask people on a data warehousing project or a big data project or whatever you want to call this, questions like, what does it mean for this project to be successful? How is success defined for this project? Almost inevitably, you'll get answers along the lines of, well, if we make the date, that's successful. If we have all the data we said we would, well, that's successful. If the users are happy and with what we deliver, well, that's successful. If we deliver on or under our budget, that's successful. You'll hear things like that proposed as, this is what makes a data warehousing project successful. So think about that question for yourself. On all the data warehousing projects you've been on or done or seen, what would people call being successful? Now, the reason success is seen as a function of budget, timelines, dates, functionality, and happy users is because that is how IT people perceive success for IT projects. Now, I've seen this from day one. I started in 1982, and from day one, success in that project was we go live with this system over the Christmas break. Okay, I joined this company in BHP in January 1982, and the target was we go live over the Christmas break, right? That was success, and that's what we were heading for. We had a 3-day outage of the plant over the Christmas break, and us installing the new computer terminals and installing the new system in those 3 days. That's what success was planned to be in this project. So that was my day one. What's success around here? We install this computer system over the Christmas break. Just to be clear, I worked at a steel mill at the time, and we were introducing an upgrade of a computer system. And a part of that upgrade was we had to take the old terminals away and put the new terminals in, and right down the production line where there were terminals, there was only room for one terminal. So literally we had to shut down the production line, rip out the old terminals, install the new ones, do new cabling for the new terminals because they're on new cabling, etc. So it was a 3-day outage of the plant, and all the guys who were going to get their Christmas holidays, all the plant guys were sent off on Christmas holidays. And yes, we did it. We got the system in and running over the Christmas break. It was really hard work. November was stressed. November 1982 was my first initiation into stress testing. And I wondered, is this stress testing of the computer system or of us? Because it was a very stressful time, I can tell you. So we got the system in and running over the Christmas break, and it was called successful. Now, it's very rare that an IT person looks past these very narrow definitions of success because the usage of the system is the responsibility of the business users, not IT. So IT does not think in business terms for success. That's how it is. You can argue the point whether that it should be that way, but that is how it is, okay? Now, what is the danger of this approach, particularly in business intelligence? It's pretty clear when you look at it, and I've seen many data warehousing projects suffer from this danger. The business people do not have a solid grasp of what they see as successful, and the IT people limit their view of success to the items mentioned, budgets, functionality, and timelines. When there is this mismatch, the likelihood of success is usually highly compromised. That's how that goes. Whenever I'm asked to review a data warehousing project and give a report on the health of the data warehousing project, I always ask to see the project charter, business requirements, and project objectives as a minimum. I also ask to see what has been written about the exploitation projects that will follow on from the delivery of the data warehouse. You might be amazed, how often these documents are entirely aimed at a technological delivery or technology deliverable and not at a business deliverable. You would be amazed. Now, you can see the grey in the beard. Back in the 90s, when we were first promoting the idea of data warehousing, our prospective clients had one overwhelming desire as a requirement for the data warehousing projects: reduce costs. It got so bad that I eventually had to have this great comeback, which was along the lines of, look, you want to reduce costs? The best way to cut costs is to close down. Is that what you want to do? I would persuade my clients that what they were really interested in was sustainable long-term profit growth, so that the company would be solid for many years to come. That's what they were really interested in. And they were fairly easy to persuade to that point of view. It would attract quality investors, it would provide good jobs and new job opportunities, it would produce great products and services at competitive prices, to win a good portion of clients and retain them over the longer period. These are the conversations that I would persuade people into, as opposed to, we just want to cut the costs of what we're doing. Now, many of my IT prospects bought into that idea, and my business prospects bought into it even faster. And in the 90s, we were selling the idea of, look, let's optimize the business to make it run as efficiently as possible, and then let's invest the money we find that is wasted back into marketing to sell more great products and services to people who need them or want them. We were selling that idea in the 90s. So when I read these things like project charter, business requirements, and project objectives, I can usually tell if the project is going to be successful just from those documents alone. Right? Don't need to look at data models, don't need to look at reports, anything else. If those documents don't line up with what's necessary to be done around here, chances are the project will be a failure. If they are too focused on budgets, on cost reductions, on timelines and dates, features and functions, it is likely that the project will fail and that it does not contribute to the profitability of the company. Very likely. Now, over the years, I've been able to tell success stories in sales cycles without naming the clients. Obviously, when you implement a data warehouse and you make a lot of money for a client, they don't want you going around telling everybody else, right? And I'll actually say many years past when I was working for IBM and I was working at the mutual life company, they would actually ask me, go stand outside the room while they would discuss something. Then they'd signal me to come back in. And I would say, after a while, I said, well, why do you get me to stand outside the room? And they said, well, you work for IBM, our competitors are your other customers. There are things that we don't want you to hear, right? Fair enough. Now, so much time has passed and everyone has moved on from some of my best success stories, I can repeat these stories without concern for those involved becoming at all upset about me talking about them. They have long moved on from the competitive advantage they gained from my contributions. So these stories are so long ago that there's no one there now who was there then. So I'm going to just talk about some success stories. And by talking about some success stories, I want you to listen from the point of view of, well, how might this apply to my company, right? But these success stories, I'll tell you, are timeless in that the same issues exist today and the same remedies apply. Further, these success stories will point out how and why my clients have had a 100% success rate when they take my advice, which they have had, right? Firstly, what is success defined as on my projects? Well, almost always, not always, but almost always, success on my projects is defined as the profit impact of the data warehouse pays for itself in the first year of operation. That's the stake in the ground that I always have. Now, it is true that not every client of mine has defined success of my projects in that way. Sometimes we were building infrastructure that was absolutely necessary. I mean, it had to be built. Didn't matter what the budget was. This infrastructure has to be built. Cost savings don't matter. Okay, so when the infrastructure was absolutely necessary, and if there was a positive financial benefit, then that was a bonus. I have done projects like that. But in general, the success we talk about to our clients was you should be able to point to profit impacts that were impossible without the data warehouse, and they should be more than 100% of the cost of the data warehouse in the first year. That's what I call success. Now, I usually said first year, but normally I was aiming at 90 days. And there's not many IT projects you can put in that pay for themselves in 90 days. By placing the focus on profit, we were able to more actively engage the business users in the project and get them focused on the management decision-making cycle and the investments that they were making. So in this blog post, let me give you two stories that were remarkable successes where others had tried and failed before us. So I'm going to be very clear. These two stories are both cases where there were a lot of money invested previously and failed, and then we came along, myself and my colleagues came along and delivered remarkably successful projects where only failure had been seen before. So the first one, I was really frustrated. I couldn't talk about this story for the longest time. But now it's 15 years later, and I don't think anybody would ever complain about me talking about something 15 years later. And this is a company called Australian Consolidated Press, ACP. So ACP was the largest publisher of magazines in Australia in the 90s. It published the country's two most popular women's magazines, that was Women's Weekly and Women's Day, and it had a 37% market share. It was owned by a man called Kerry Packer, and all Australians know who he was. He was the richest man in the country. After Rupert Murdoch left, Kerry Packer was the richest man in Australia. The magazine publishing industry was highly regulated and it was highly competitive. It was also very mature and was coming under attack from the internet during the 90s. So revenues and profits were falling and ACP was doing more and more poorly as the second half of the 90s rolled on. From about 95, as the internet happened and this market was so mature and overcrowded, ACP really struggled in the second half of the 90s. So I first tried to sell a data warehouse to ACP when I was working at Hitachi Data Systems in 1997, and we lost out to, we'll do that internally, there's no need to hire you expensive consultants. Okay? That's how we lost. I had another crack at, that project failed. I had another crack at ACP when I was working at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we did a small consulting gig there. We were privy to some of their internal data, and we developed a proposal for a data warehousing program for 2 years, which was the standard sort of offer from PwC. In that case, we lost to our ERP vendor tells us they can do a data warehouse for us, and we're going with our ERP vendor. So I lost a second time in ACP, and that project failed too. So by the time that project had failed, I'd moved on to Ardent, the makers of DataStage, which is now with IBM, and I was a professional services manager at Ardent. And we had to negotiate a torturous sales process because senior figures in the Packer Empire wanted Axiom to do the work. And to be clear, Axiom was part owned by Kerry Packer. So when it's part owned, it's very hard to beat them. They did not want the work to go to a third party that had no other relationships with the Packer Empire. Ardent had sold nothing to the Packer Empire. So, of course, selling something into the Packer Empire, that was really, very number one of the top priority companies in Australia to get into was the Packer Empire, right? So Axiom were making all sorts of promises and they were a sister company and it was a very tough fight. But eventually we got the deal because we had the best sales stories of making money for our clients. And by now, if you can believe this, it had been nearly 3 years I'd been selling to ACP to get a foot into the door of the Packer Empire. And that was something really worth working hard on. The time frame, we had to deliver version 1.0 after 3 years of selling. Yep, you guessed it, 90 days. So sell for 3 years, you got 90 days to deliver. And at the time when we went in April 2000 it was. We went in April 2000. The fortunes of ACP were poor. Things were doing poorly. Kerry Packer himself called the company a dog with fleas. So when your boss is calling your company a dog with fleas, you know you got a problem. The guy who ran ACP was actually the best friend of James Packer, Kerry's son, and they'd grown up together. And Kerry personally intervened and fired the CEO of ACP due to the poor performance of the company. That's how bad it was. He fired his son's mate. And the new CEO was a guy called John Alexander, and he was very dubious about being given ACP as a challenge. Obviously, it was given to him as a challenge. John, can you fix this? Everyone thought that might be something of a poisoned chalice, and reasonably so. When I met John face to face, during the sales cycle to talk about the project. One of his comments was, "I sure hope you know what you're doing because we really do need some help around here." And this is the CEO of ACP saying to somebody who's never worked in publishing, "I hope you know what you're doing because we need help." Of course, I had no idea at all what happened inside a publisher because I'd never worked for it. This is the largest publisher in the country, and I'd never worked for a publisher, so I had no idea how their business worked. And I had no idea how one might go about improving the fortune of the country's largest publisher. I was especially worried because it was clear that no one at ACP had any idea how to turn around their fortunes either. Right? They'd been at this for 5 years. They'd fired their CEO. They were fresh out of ideas, and I was coming in as somebody with no experience in that area going, yeah, we're going to build your data warehouse, and then we're going to figure out how to make you more profitable in declining times. So Kerry Packer was the richest man in the country, and he was not able to find anyone to turn around the largest publishing house in the country. Why would I imagine that I could figure out a problem that had seemingly evaded the best minds in the publishing industry? But that was a job at hand. So in those days, I had a unique way in Australia of approaching the business requirements workshop that we used to hold, and I'll talk about that in the next blog post. It was a technique that I was taught to by Metaphor Computers Systems, which included envisioning what the client would call outstanding success. This was a very powerful technique that allowed us to get from the clients what would be called outstanding success 2 years in the future if they were able to achieve it. This would put what we'd call a stake in the ground to aim at in terms of business success. Now, this is how it went. At one of the workshops, one of the publishers made the following comment. She was asking me, as a consultant to her company, did I know this? And she said words close to the effect. Do you know that we do not just publish issues of the same magazine? Do you understand that our product is different each week? Of course, women's magazines, what did I know, right? And I said, well, no, I'd never read one of their magazines. And I said, well, no, I don't understand that. Can you please explain that idea to me more, right? And she said, sure, it's like this. We put different people on the cover each week, and we write different articles inside the magazine to suit the audience attracted by the cover. Sure, we cycle through these themes as weekly and monthly magazines, but we might take some months to cycle back to the same type of people on the cover. And I went, that's interesting. Can you give me some examples so I can understand better? And she said, sure, let's look at the royals, okay? So the royals in Australia, the royal family, the royals appeal to a certain set of people. We can put the Queen on the cover. We used to put Charles and Diana on the cover a lot. We can put Andrew and Fergie on the cover. You know, any of the royals on the cover appeals to people who are traditional, who are monarchists, who support the Queen, that sort of thing. And then we put stories in the magazine about the royals. We put in opinion pieces saying we should stay as part of the Commonwealth with the Queen as head of state. We get advertising that is royal friendly. The whole magazine will be aimed at people who are royal friendly, right? And so we produce that magazine. And then, by contrast, we have Tom and Nicole. So for those who don't know, Tom Cruise was married to Nicole Kidman at the time, and they were an incredibly popular couple in Australia. Tom and Nicole represented new and modern, and they were movie stars. They weren't royalty. They have a different base of support, different fans, if you like, much younger, mostly less concerned with politics. So when we put Tom and Nicole on the front, we will have opinion pieces about the Republic debate, and we'll talk about the movies that are out now that are suited to young people. It will be a modern and new look to the magazine that month. Now we do this because if we hit the same demographic month after month after month, we alienate those who are not in the demographic. So even though people who like Tom and Nicole are less likely to buy a Royals issue, those who are Royals are less likely to buy a Tom and Nicole issue. By presenting different issues with different themes, we get more sales than if we pushed just the one or the other. And does that make sense to you? And I said, yeah, actually. Once she explained it like that, because I'd seen the covers, obviously, when I go to the supermarket, I'd see the covers of these magazines and I'd see them advertised on TV, etc. So I said, yeah, sure, that makes a lot of sense. Your product is so different from week to week that you consider it a new product, even if it gets recycled to an extent a few months later. That's what you're telling me, right? And it was. So we had that conversation during this workshop. Now, this conversation was noted among all the other conversations that we had. And then I had a meeting with the guys who were the experts on the ERP. And we got into the conversation and I asked them, one of the questions I asked them was, please tell me how the number of copies to send to each of the 7,000 outlets, locations, for each magazine is calculated in the ERP. So this company had 7,000 outlets around the country. You know, in Australia, you can buy a magazine at your local railway station, for example. You can buy a magazine in your corner shop. So in the whole country, there were 7,000 outlets, roughly, where you could buy a magazine. So each week, their magazines would be delivered to 7,000 outlets, along with a lot of other stuff. As I suspected, the number of copies was calculated based on a straight line history of sales to that location. This method left ACP with about 25% of copies unsold of their #1 magazine each week. It also left them with many sellouts. That is, the number of copies that were delivered was not sufficient to get them through to Sunday. So they were sold out. And of course, being sold out is not desirable. You still want a few copies of the shelf so that you keep the shelf space and so not to allow a competitor to get that shelf space. So we added one more idea to the agenda for testing after we were implemented. And that was analysing the data warehouse sales to determine if the cover of the magazine showed correlations with the sales of the outlets. That was one of the things we wrote down. Must analyse this when we have the data warehouse, right? Now the theory was that if the Royals versus Tom and Nicole truly did appeal to different people, which made sense, then perhaps those people bought their magazines from different outlets because they live in different places. If this was so, then the ERP was actually not able to know this and could not adjust the copies allocated to each of the 7,000 outlets to match the forecast sales for this cover and this content, right? So the ERP couldn't do it. When the data warehouse went live and we had done all the must-have reports, we decided to dive into this question because sellouts and oversupplies were hugely expensive for ACP. And this came up when I was doing electronic arts, the exact same problem, except for electronic arts with 25,000 outlets in Europe. Now, as you might have guessed from telling this story, why am I telling this story? We found very high levels of correlation between the theme of the magazine and the sales of the 7,000 outlets. Very high correlation. So we got the publishers to tell us all the different themes they ran with, and we went back, we had 10 years of history, so we went back and we profiled all these different themes, and we calculated from all these different themes how many copies had been sold at each of the 7,000 outlets for the different themes with growth over time and things like that. So we did quite a sophisticated set of modelling profiling the different themes. We then developed a forecasting mechanism for the ERP in the data warehouse, and we fed the ERP with our custom forecasting mechanism. So, we said, surely we should see some improvement, right? And we did expect some improvement. Now, I will just note, I was gone from the project by now, so this was reported to me later. I had moved on to the next project I'm going to talk about. But the improvement was massive. It wasn't just a small improvement. It was an astonishing improvement. It was not only that we were able to supply the outlets where the magazine was popular, we were able to supply outlets where the magazine would be less popular. So we were able to reduce both our sold outs and our oversupplies. And the team were able to learn over about a 2-year period how to recalculate and recalibrate the forecasting module for a number of copies sent to each of the 7,000 outlets based on the profiles and the 10 years of historical data that was available. This recalibration reduced oversupplies, but more importantly, it reduced sellouts as well. So people were no longer buying a competitive magazine so often. Now, that's not the only thing we did, obviously. There were other things that we did, but this was the big change that led to a massive performance improvement by ACP. So inside 2 years, Kerry Packer had called this company a dog with fleas and fired the CEO, and apparently nobody in the country could figure out how to turn this company around. And we went in, no experience at all in this industry, and said, we'll build a data warehouse and we'll figure it out, right? No idea what we're going to do, but we'd figure it out. 2 years, ACP had doubled its gross profit in a highly regulated, highly competitive, mature industry under attack by the internet. ACP doubled its gross profit. That was a stunning result. Market share went from 37% to 42% in a mature, saturated market, and Kerry Packer himself, at the annual general meeting, called ACP, quote, the jewel in the corporate crown, unquote, just 2 years after he called it a dog with fleas, that's a stunning turnaround. That's what you call success of a data warehousing project, right? That's what success looks like. Now, John Alexander, for being willing to take the risks necessary, and these were risks, no doubt about it, he was rewarded and moved up the Packer hierarchy, eventually becoming CEO of the group. Kerry Packer himself mandated, as in you must have, all his companies have a data warehouse just like ACP. And the consultant I put in as a business analyst was named as a signatory and responsible for all Packer company BI solutions. That's what success looks like. So all Packer companies had to have this consultant's blessing on their projects. And I remember I'd moved to Europe by now, and he called me up and he said, I've died and gone to consultant heaven. I'm the signatory for every data warehouse project for the richest man in the country. That's a good gig as a consultant. That's a good gig. And I actually brought that guy out from the US to place at another client where the project, we didn't get ongoing business, and I moved him to ACP. So he had a great 5 years in Australia. So that's what I mean by successful data warehousing project. You can double the gross profit and garner 5% market share, and the richest man in the country says that your client has gone from being a dog with fleas to the jewel in the corporate crown in just 2 short years. That's a successful data warehousing project. So after Kerry's death, James sold ACP, and it was rated as one of the top 10 publishing houses in the world when James sold it. Now, you might ask the question, well, how long did it take to get the investment back? Because that's what we said was success, right? So let me tell you about that, because this was simply remarkable as well. And it's a good sales story. Now, ACP, the budget was 300,000 Australian dollars. The first 90-day budget was $300,000 to get the version 1 data warehouse up and running, with later funding to be dependent on success of the project, right? So the target was to impact the profit line by $300,000 in the first year. That was the target. While we were building the data warehouse, just as things happened, the managing director of another packet company came to us looking for ideas. Now, his company was a distribution company. This company delivered the ACP magazines to the 7,000 outlets, and it also delivered competitive magazines and other products as well. Their carriers, trucks and things, their carriers went past all 7,000 outlets at least once a week. Many of the carriers went past some of the outlets 5 days a week, Sunday to Friday. The distribution data was inside the ERP, which of course meant that we had access to competitive information about other magazines, which was not allowed to be passed back into ACP publishers. Now, so that's the background for who came to this meeting. Now, we started the meeting, and the managing director of the distribution company explained his problem. They were bidding for the Reader's Digest distribution for the next 5 years. And everybody who's my age knows who Reader's Digest is. It's not very popular amongst younger people, but Reader's Digest used to be huge. So this was the contract to distribute all copies of Reader's Digest to all 7,000 outlets for the next 5 years. So it was a substantial contract. Now, the managing director explained that he had been personally informed that his company would not be getting the deal. And when he got the phone call to tell him that, he begged for one more meeting, and he had been granted this concession by the senior management of Reader's Digest. So he was here looking for ideas. What could he sell them that they'd not sold them so far? Can we come up with something to win back this deal we've been told we're not getting? So we were brainstorming and kicking around ideas just in the meeting room. No idea was too outrageous. He's like, everything on the table. This is Reader's Digest. Any idea, I don't care how far-fetched it sounds, put everything on the table. And so because of the size of the deal, everything on the table. So the consultant I'd placed there said, just comes out with, well, why not promise them that our data warehouse will have their sales numbers on their desktops in their offices on a daily basis, 9 a.m. in the morning. So 9 a.m., they come in, they got their sales numbers from yesterday. And the MD looked at him and said, can we actually do that? And he said, how the hell would I know? Besides, it doesn't matter if they don't buy it, right? That was his response. And the MD is like, I like that guy. Let's add that to the presentation. That sounds like a great idea. And he said, you've got 10 minutes. You can explain all this. You get 10 minutes in the presentation. He goes, cool. So about 2 weeks later, they went off and they did their presentation, etc. And about 2 weeks later, our CIO asked this consultant and I to come into his office. He had a voicemail on the phone from the managing director of the distribution company. And they were obviously having, from the voice message, they were obviously having a huge party. There's always shouting, etc. So the CIO just played the voice message on his phone. And the MD was screaming, we've got the deal, we've got the deal, we got Reader's Digest. You guys, you have to deliver now. Basically, you promised you got to deliver. But they were obviously having a very big party. Now I, as a consultant, was never told the value of that deal. Right? They're not going to tell me how big the deal was, but it's obviously a big deal. It's obviously well in excess of $300,000. That's for sure. You know, delivering Reader's Digest to 7,000 outlets for 5 years would be worth millions. I'm not sure how much it's worth. Nobody told me, but it's got to be millions. So here we were. We still had a few weeks to run on our project, even to get it into production. We weren't even in production. We just promised Reader's Digest, yeah, sure, we'll have the numbers on your desk 9 o'clock in the morning. Remember, this is 2000. This is not, this is not in the era of really reliable networks. And so we're like, okay, well, now we have to deliver this. And the CIO was shaking our hands and going, gentlemen, congratulations. I've never seen anything quite like this in my professional life before. Well done. Back to work. So when your data warehouse becomes an essential competitive weapon that wins you a multi-million-dollar deal, you did something right. Okay? You know you're doing something right. And I tell that sales story because this is what success of a data warehousing project looks like. Your data warehouse can be used as a competitive weapon, can be used to double the gross profit of your organisation in a 2-year period. That's a sort of success you can get if you do it properly, right? Now, of course, this is one of my best sales stories because the company in question was in such a mature and competitive industry that was also being pressured by one of the largest technological changes in the last 20 years, the internet, right? To turn around such a company based on the data inside the ERP and other systems was an amazing feat. When you stop and think, the richest man in the country couldn't find anybody else to solve this problem, and we knew nothing about publishing, but together with the warehouse and the ideas from the business people, we were able to catapult that company forward to the extent that James eventually sold it for a pretty penny. Now, in case you're wondering, no, this is not the only example of this sort of thing I have, right? It's just one of the few that I can talk about so easily because the company has been sold twice since then, and no one from that project is still inside that company. In fact, a guy who used to work for me is still there, but he wasn't on the project. He went there later. So I just wanted to tell you that story because people say, what is success for a BI project? What is success for a data warehousing project? That's what success looks like, right? That's what success looks like. Now, Qantas Cargo. This is a really good story because it talks about different techniques leading to success. So everybody knows who Qantas is. I mean, Qantas is the national carrier for Australia. Nobody in BI is not going to know who Qantas is. Now, they have an international cargo division that sells cargo space on Qantas flights, and it's a very profitable part of the overall Qantas business. The system that was used to manage cargo was from Unisys, and to say it was not very good is very generous. It certainly did not have a data warehouse that would help Qantas Cargo optimize their business. There was nothing like that inside their system. So in the late 90s, Qantas Cargo decided they would try and build a data warehouse to optimize the Qantas Cargo business. And as I recall, it was explained to me that the prior 3 projects had failed. The new project manager, the third project manager being, and there was a new project manager, he'd been told that if this effort failed, then he should resign from Qantas and there was no way forward for him in the company. So this man, let's call him Fred, because he works in Australia, so we'll call him Fred. He'd been in the airlines for 20 years or so at the time, and he was very concerned that this project would be a success. He later told me that he called 10 or so of his most trusted colleagues and asked them, if I have a really tough data warehouse project that has to work, just tough project, but it has to work, who should I get? And he told me he called 10 people. And Fred told me that 6 of the 10 gave my name. And no other individual got more than one mention. So Fred had decided that with that sort of reputation, I had that reputation, that I was the man for the job. He still ran us through the hoops of a tender to squeeze us on price, that beggar, and told us that they had three other tenderers. He told us they had 4 tenderers and beat us up on price for about 2 months, beggar. But we were apparently destined to get the job as long as I presented as his colleagues had claimed I would, because success was necessary. So he gave us a hard time in getting the business to really have firm in his mind that we could do what we said we could do. Now, by this time, as things happened, and I've explained in a previous blog, I had been constructively demoted back to a consulting role. And I decided that Qantas Cargo was so important to us at Ardent that I would lead the project myself. And Fred was right. The Unisys system, it was a nightmare. What it did, it was just a nightmare. And this would be a very tough project. And it was once I'd been given what came out of the system, it was no surprise to me that the 3 previous efforts had failed, right? No surprise at all. Now, the reason for the importance was that Qantas had bought, the reason it was important to us, Ardent, was Qantas had bought an enterprise license deal for DataStage. And this project for cargo would be the first large DataStage project at Qantas. So obviously when Qantas bought into this enterprise license deal, you don't actually pay your money up front. You put the purchase structure in place, and then you buy off that purchase structure. This was the first license purchased off that structure. So if we did badly, there'd be no more licenses, right? So this was it. Qantas itself is a huge company. So this was the first significant data stage project inside Qantas, having won the Qantas Enterprise license. So it was very, very important for us. So I decided, well, given it's this important, I'll do the project myself rather than just manage it. Now, as I said above, we ran a unique workshop process. However, at Qantas, for reasons I can't remember because it's too long ago, we decided to run the process as a series of interviews. So I set about interviewing the 20 most senior people in Qantas Cargo. And the schedule was 3 or 4 interviews a day. And no one can do more than 4 interviews a day at that sort of level. 4 interviews per day is really grueling exercise. Now, in Qantas' case, we also did not record these interviews as there was sensitive information to discuss about personnel. It was often my habit to record interviews on tape, but when personnel issues are being discussed, recording will stifle discussion because no man will ever believe that a recording can never find its way into the public, whereas a conversation that's not recorded can easily be dismissed as a misunderstanding. So when you do not record interviews, the work of the interview is actually much harder because you have no backup tape to go to. So I just wanted to mention that to set the scene. So I ran our outstanding success technique, which I'll talk about in the next blog entry, and that's so incredibly successful for all the clients that we use on, but not what people expect. So we always get complaints about this technique. I have not run this technique with any company and not got a complaint about it. So it was pretty well ready when Qantas Cargo was no different. About 2 weeks into the project, Fred and I were summoned to the CEO's office, not just the CIO. we were summoned to the CEO's office, and I knew it was coming. Fred was all upset, but I knew it was coming. Now the conversation, and I'll summarise it, it's not exactly what happened, but it went something like this. The CEO says, my people are complaining that you do not know what you're doing. Can you tell me about that? And I went, sure. I bet they're saying things like, he's not asking us the questions we are expecting. He's not asking us what data we use, what reports we use, what reports we want, those sorts of things. Would I be correct? And he's like, that's quite remarkable because that's very much the flavour of what they are asking. Tell me. They tell me you know nothing about cargo, nothing about our business, and you are not asking them questions that would lead you to know about our business or our reporting needs. Quite frankly, they don't trust you and they don't believe you. You have a real problem here. And so there's a standard. So I said, may I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And so I said, this project has failed 3 times before we were asked to come in, right? I have the documents from the failures. Those documents define the data your managers say they need. They define the reports they say they need. The interviews run and the documentation produced is exactly what your managers think I should be asking about. Would that be correct? No, and he said, yep, that's correct. So I said, have you ever heard the saying that the definition of insanity is to do the same things over and over again, expecting a different result? And he laughed, because he obviously had. And I said, your projects failed precisely because people asked those questions. Those sets of questions are not sufficient or even necessary to make a data warehousing project successful. I said, we take a different approach because we developed over a long time and we improved it and it works and we improve it each time over. So we have a different approach. And I said, Fred here hired us because we're the best. We're the best in the country, right? No question. We know what we're doing and we're the best. And the reason we are the best in the country is precisely because We don't do what everybody else does. We do things differently. And because we do things differently, we can guarantee the success of your project if you do as we advise you to do. Guarantee it. So you'll see this when we show you the prototype in 6 weeks' time. So I said, will you take my word that the reason we are not doing what your senior staff expect, what they have done 3 times before and failed with, is because we know that it doesn't work? Will you take my word for that? Will you take my word that we are doing things differently because that is how we guarantee success of our clients' projects? And I remember he sat back in his chair and he looked at me and he goes, very well put, young man, because I was a pretty young man. I was only 36. So he goes, very well put, young man. I look forward to the prototype demonstration, right? So we shook hands and went on my way. And Fred, who'd gone in there shaking in his boots, Fred was very impressed. And we laboured long and hard on that prototype, right? So when the day of the prototype came, I did the talking, I stood up and did the presentation, and one of the team members ran the demonstration. And the result was stunning. I have to say, that prototype was a remarkable prototype, and the team did a remarkable job. That was a really great team effort, that particular prototype. In just 8 weeks, we had to do the requirements and build the prototype to ask for the money. It was a superb job. Every team member deserves the greatest of praise for their dedication, commitment, hard work, and just plain brilliance at their jobs. It was just one of those short periods where you just get the right people and everything works. It doesn't happen a lot, but it was one of the good ones, right? And I was having fun. When I was presenting the prototype, I knew it was good, right? I knew this was really hot. It was a real pleasure to present it. It was one of the best I'd ever been involved in building, and that's really saying something. So those managers who'd been complaining just 6 weeks earlier, they were like, wow, blown away. And they were making comments like, these guys are mind readers. That's what I need. Looking at the screen, that's what I need. But I never once talked about what's up there. How the hell do these guys know what we need when we didn't even tell them? I mean, these are the sort of comments that were coming out. How the hell did they build this, right? So eventually, over all the excitement, and it was quite an exciting presentation. I mean, this is IT. We don't get to have that much excitement generally, right? So over the excitement, the CEO raised his hand and hushed down what was, for an IT crowd, a very excited crowd. And the CEO said something along the lines of, I have to say that is one of the most remarkable demonstrations I've ever seen in my life. You told me 6 weeks ago you'd never worked in cargo. I got to ask you, is that true? And I went, yep, I have never worked in cargo. I've not even worked in anything like cargo before, nothing. And the CEO said, the presentation you just gave demonstrates a level of understanding of our business. I would be impressed if someone who'd been here 10 years gave that presentation. You understand our business better than many people who've been here for a decade. I have to ask, how did you do that? Because we'd only met the one time before, right? The conversation I repeated. And he's like, how did you do that? And I said, sure. You'll remember 6 weeks ago, you invited me to your office to discuss the complaints of the people in this room that I was not doing what they expected. He nods and goes, yes, of course, I remember. And I said, well, you will remember that I told you that we do not ask the same questions as everybody else. And you'll remember that I said, we've got this unique technique with a unique way to go about our job, and it's because of this that we get different results. And you will remember that I told you, we are the best there is at this. You remember I told you that, right? We're the best. He laughed and he nodded and he said, yep, I remember you did tell me that. And I said, well, pointed to the screen, this is what it looks like. The way we approach our projects allows us to develop a very deep understanding of the drivers of our client's business very quickly, which means that we can then build the charts, the graphs and reports we know you need to generate outstanding success over the next 2 years. I said, in short, we can figure out what you need better than you can figure out what you need because we use a different approach. And he smiled and he says, okay, I have to admit, this is impressive. This is very impressive. He said, I think I speak for all my senior staff when I say that what we've seen as a prototype, that's what we need. We want you to make that real. And I said, great. Now there is the issue of money for the project, right? I'm sure Fred here, because Fred's sitting next to me, I said, I'm sure Fred here has some paperwork for you and your staff to sign off to approve the budget. May I presume that all of you are okay with that we can approve the budget today? And the CEO just nodded and said, yep, you have your money. It was a Friday. He says, come back on Monday, get this thing into production as fast as you can. So now on that project, so that was how well the prototype worked for Qantas Cargo, an industry segment that none of us had any experience in. But by using this mechanism of outstanding success, which I'll talk about in the next blog, we were able to present a prototype in 8 weeks that stunned the senior management. And they felt that we had like 10 years experience in their business. We nailed it. That was one we just nailed it. Now, I will say there were plenty of bumps in the road for the project, and that's been pretty generous. There were a lot of difficulties on the project. And not that we need to go into them in this blog entry, but at the end of the next year, the CEO of Qantas Cargo declared that the project was the most successful project ever run in Qantas Cargo. That was how it was seen. Now, I'm not personally privy to the financial aspects of the results produced, as again, I'd moved on, but it is sufficient to say that the project team I left behind remained working there for about 5 years. So they didn't stay for 5 years because they're a bunch of fools, right? So our technique of envisioning outstanding success 2 years into the future was integral to making Qantas Cargo such an outstanding success of a project. The business managers were absolutely signed up and committed to making those visions come true. All we really did was give them the graphs, the charts, reports that they would need to look at on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to track the key business drivers that would indicate that they were on the right path, or indeed deviating from the path of getting to outstanding success. The team later built all sorts of applications to detect how to optimize various areas in the business processes and to optimize space, weight allocations inside the aircraft and things like that. But it was this envisioning outstanding success 2 years into the future technique that allowed the senior managers to clearly and accurately put a stake in the ground as to what they wanted their department to be in 2 years' time, that allowed us to build one of the best prototypes I have ever done. And that's all the production system was. The initial version 1.0 was the prototype made real. Now, of course, in those days we had no pre-packaged data models, so we still had to run the business requirements interviews before we built the prototypes. We now delay the whole business requirements process until we've analysed the data that is available, so we know what is possible and not possible as we do the interviews. And this has been a rather radical change in our procedures, which has been enabled by CTL. So, in summary, too often, success in a data warehouse project is linked to budget, features, functions, timelines, delivery dates, those sorts of things. Way too often. And if it is, that's going to put success at risk. Doing that takes the focus off what should be the real measure of success, profit contribution. More specifically, can we get a financial payback for the data warehouse in the first 12 months of operation? That should be your leading question. And I've given you 2 sales stories to demonstrate to you that that should be eminently possible. By focusing on return on investment, by focusing on achieving what can be agreed as outstanding success, you look beyond the end of the data warehouse build and look into the realm of the exploitation projects that will be run out of the data warehouse after its implementation. That keeps the business people far more active, far more engaged than they might otherwise be. In short, it keeps their attention. You've got to have the attention of the business people. It really gets them ready to use the data warehouse for exploitation when it comes into production. Where this connection to the exploitation projects is weak or lacking, it is that much harder to actually make the business process changes or run the business projects that will actually make the money you need from the data warehouse to pay for it. Now, I used two old but still very relevant examples of how I've done this in the past to deliver massive value to clients and that they were on the receiving end of. So two old examples, but certainly I have many more recent examples. And of course, on the front page of our website is the car phone warehouse example. Okay? So if you got this far, I'd like to say thank you very much for reading or listening. I hope this set of sales stories was useful to you. Thank you very much.